The world's largest warship is on fire, not from an Iranian missile, not from a Houthi drone, but from within. That tells you everything you need to know about where this war actually stands. The USS Gerald R Ford, carrying nearly 4,500 sailors, has been at sea for over 261 days, sent out for a routine European deployment in June 2025, then rerouted to the Caribbean, then pulled hard into the Middle East as Operation Epic Fury, the joint US-Israeli campaign against Iran, entered its second week. This is not a carrier on a mission. This is a carrier stretched to its breaking point. Sailors aboard have missed funerals, missed their children's early years, and some are already planning to leave the Navy when this deployment finally ends. There were already reports of frustrated sailors deliberately blocking pipes, acts of quiet rebellion inside the iron belly of American sea power. If the Ford stays deployed until mid-April, it will shatter the post-Vietnam War record of 294 days at sea set by the USS Abraham Lincoln in 2020. And now, suspected Iranian projectiles have struck 3 commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz. While Washington insists everything is under control, it is not. The fire broke out on March 12, 2026, in the main laundry spaces of the USS Gerald R Ford. And the first thing Washington did was reach for the microphone and tell you not to worry. U.S. Central Command posted its statement on X with the kind of practiced calm that powerful institutions deploy when they are, in fact, deeply worried. The cause of the fire was not combat-related and is contained. There is no damage to the ship's propulsion plant, and the aircraft carrier remains fully operational. Now take that sentence and read it slowly. Read it the way a doctor reads a chart when the patient is awake and watching. Because what that sentence tells you, beyond the words, is that CENTCOM knew immediately what people would assume. People would assume Iran. People would assume the worst. And so the denial came first, before the facts, before the investigation, before anything. That is not the behavior of a command that is in control of the narrative. That is the behavior of a command that fears losing it. And you need to understand why that fear is justified right now, because the USS Gerald R Ford is not just a ship. It is the physical manifestation of American military supremacy. It is a $13 billion floating fortress commissioned in 2017 with innovative technologies, including a vacuum-based sewage system adapted from cruise ships to conserve water. And already, right there, you get your first glimpse of the disconnect between the mythology and the reality. The most powerful nation on Earth built its crown jewel of naval power using a toilet system borrowed from a cruise liner. And that system, predictably, catastrophically, has been failing at sea. Most of the USS Gerald Ford's approximately 600 toilets have reportedly become non-functional at times, forcing sailors to wait up to 45 minutes or more for working facilities. Internal records show hundreds of failures of the sewage system over short periods, including an internal report of 205 breakdowns in 4 days during 2025. The acid flush required to clear buildup costs around $400,000 per use and can only be done in port, not at sea. So here you have it. The ship that is supposed to project American dominance over the Persian Gulf, the ship whose shadow is meant to make Tehran tremble, is struggling to maintain basic sanitation for the thousands of young men and women living inside its steel hull. And now there is a fire in the laundry room. This is not incidental. This is not a footnote. This is the story inside the story. Because power, real power, is not just about the weapons you carry. It is about the human beings who carry them and what happens to those human beings when the system pushes them past the breaking point. Let us talk about where this ship has been, because the journey itself is a kind of political allegory. The carrier departed Naval Station Norfolk, Virginia on June 24, 2025, for what was initially a regularly scheduled deployment to the U.S. European Command Area of Responsibility. It was subsequently redirected to the U.S. Southern Command Area for counter-narcotics operations, before being extended and sent to the Middle East ahead of the start of hostilities with Iran. Think about what that means for the people on board. They signed up for one deployment. They were rerouted into another. Then they were extended. Then they were rerouted again, this time into an active war zone. As of Monday, the Ford had been at sea for 261 days. And if this deployment continues into mid-April, it will break the post-Vietnam War 294-day record for carrier deployment set by the USS Abraham Lincoln in 2020. That is a record no sailor wants to hold. That is not glory. That is endurance. And there is a difference. Now let us zoom out for a moment, because what is happening on the Ford is happening within a much larger geopolitical earthquake that the American media is still struggling to fully comprehend. On February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States launched surprise airstrikes on multiple sites and cities across Iran, killing Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and other Iranian officials, starting a war. Let that sentence land for a moment. The United States of America, the self-proclaimed leader of the liberal international order, participated in an operation that assassinated a sitting head of state. President Trump announced the attacks in a Truth Social post at 2 a.m. EST. There was no address to the media or public briefing to Congress beyond a notification to the Gang of Eight shortly before strikes commenced. The most consequential military action since the 2003 invasion of Iraq was announced on social media in the middle of the night by a president who did not consult Congress, did not hold a press conference, did not address the nation he was sending to war, and the war came fast and hard. US and Israeli strikes continued for a second day, with over 900 strikes during the first 12 hours alone, while Iran sustained its retaliatory missile campaign against US bases, Israel, and Gulf countries, launching roughly 420 missiles across 9 countries and ships at sea. Dubai, one of the great commercial hubs of the modern world, a city that has positioned itself as the Switzerland of the Middle East, a place of neutrality and business, found itself under fire. When Dubai International Airport, one of the world's busiest, was damaged by drone strikes during the second day of the conflict, it temporarily halted all flights and reopened in only limited capacity a few days later. That is not a regional skirmish. That is the beginning of a systemic unraveling of the post-Cold War order in the Middle East. And here is what they are not telling you on the evening news. Just before the strikes began, on February 27, 2026, Oman's Foreign Minister Badr al-Busaidi said a breakthrough had been reached, and Iran had agreed both to never stockpile enriched uranium and to full verification by the IAEA. Furthermore, Iran had agreed to irreversibly downgrade its current enriched uranium to the lowest level possible. Al-Busaidi said peace was within reach. Peace was within reach. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Oman's foreign minister, a diplomat with no stake in exaggeration, a man whose country has served as a trusted back channel between Washington and Tehran for decades. Peace was within reach, and Washington struck anyway. Talks were expected to resume on March 2nd. The war began on February 28th. Now connect that to the sailors on the Ford. Connect it to the 22-year-old kid from Ohio or Georgia or South Texas who is somewhere in the Red Sea right now, 9 months from home, sleeping in berthing compartments that smell of malfunction, waiting in line for a toilet that barely works, watching a fire get put out in the laundry room while somewhere above his head, FA-18s are taking off to strike targets in a country that 2 days before the war began had agreed to peace. This is not happening in a vacuum. Anti-war protests have erupted in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Democratic leaders, including former Vice President Kamala Harris and Senator Tim Kaine, immediately condemned the conflict as a war of choice launched without congressional authorization. The sailor on the Ford can see that too. He has a phone. He has a connection to the internet when operational security allows. He knows what people back home are saying. And what they are saying is that this war was not necessary. Flushing a t-shirt down the toilet is the 2026 equivalent of low-tech, deniable sabotage. But if leadership ignores the signal, it will escalate. If the mission drags on, today's clogged toilets will become tomorrow's refused orders. That analysis is not coming from a radical anti-war publication. It is coming from people who understand military history and who recognize the pattern of the soldier or sailor who has been pushed past the point where the mission makes sense to him anymore. The pattern that America has seen before, most catastrophically in Vietnam, where the moral collapse of the mission preceded the military collapse of the war. And during the Abraham Lincoln's 290-day deployment in 2002, the crew faced a similar problem with fatigue. The command responded by telling them to get over it. That was 2002. The world was different. The information environment was different. You could tell a sailor to get over it, and he had no way to broadcast his dissent to the world. That control no longer exists. Now consider the strategic picture more carefully, because this is where it gets genuinely alarming for anyone who studies how wars escalate and metastasize. By March 5th, the Islamic Republic had already launched roughly 585 ballistic missiles and 1,122 drones. In the opening stages of the conflict, Iran directed some 40% of its missile launches at Israel. As of March 4th, however, that figure had declined to slightly more than 20%. This shift suggests that Iran is changing its targeting priorities under mounting pressure. Read that carefully. Iran is not collapsing. Iran is adapting. Iran is shifting its targeting in real time, which means Iran still has the capacity to think, to calculate, to redirect its weapons towards softer targets that the US and Israel have not fully prepared to defend. And those softer targets include commercial shipping. Suspected Iranian projectiles hit 3 commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz just this week. The same week, the Ford caught fire in the Red Sea. The global economy moves through the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that narrow passage. If Iran decides to fully commit to closing or severely disrupting that strait, something Tehran has threatened for decades and now has genuine motivation to attempt, the economic consequences for the United States and its allies would be severe, immediate, and deeply felt by ordinary Americans at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in the supply chains that deliver every product to every shelf in every town. This war is not abstract. It is not a map exercise. It is already reshaping the physical infrastructure of global commerce. And we need to talk about what is happening politically inside Iran right now, because this too is being misread by almost everyone covering it. The death of Ali Khamenei triggered an election for a new supreme leader. Under the terms of Iran's constitution, an interim leadership council was established on March 1st to exercise the functions of Iran's head of state. Mojtaba Khamenei was elected on March 8, 2026, to replace his father as supreme leader, and the IRGC, as well as Iran's top leaders, pledged their allegiance to him. So the decapitation strategy, the idea that killing Khamenei would fracture the Islamic Republic from within, that the people of Iran would rise up and welcome American bombs as liberation, has already failed its first test. Within 10 days of Khamenei's death, his son was in place. The IRGC had pledged loyalty, and Iran had a functioning supreme leadership. The regime did not collapse. It adapted. And Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, speaking to NBC News during the second week of the war, made clear exactly where Tehran stands. When asked if Iran would be afraid of the US putting boots on the ground, Araghchi said, "No, we are waiting for them. We are confident that we can confront them, and that would be a big disaster for them." That is not bluster from a man in a comfortable diplomatic office. That is a message delivered under bombardment from a country that has absorbed American pressure for over 4 decades and has never, not once, simply surrendered to it. You may agree with the US decision to go to war with Iran, or you may not, but you cannot look at that statement and honestly believe this conflict ends quickly, cleanly, or cheaply. And so we return to the Ford. We return to the fire in the laundry room. We return to the 2 sailors being treated for burns. The location of the incident is operationally significant because the laundry spaces concentrate electrical systems, ventilation infrastructure, and high-use service equipment within support compartments critical to sustained deployment. Naval Sea Systems Command's forward-deployed regional maintenance center was preparing to assist with electrical support, meaning the Ford cannot simply fix this problem on its own, at sea, in a war zone. It needs external help. It needs the infrastructure of the shore to reach it while it sits in the northern Red Sea, off the coast of Al-Waj, Saudi Arabia, surrounded by the consequences of a war that began 2 weeks ago and shows no signs of ending. Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia, whose state is home to the Norfolk base where the Ford departed, said, "Many of the toilets are inoperable. The Ford is in tough shape and needs to come back to port. Quality of life and morale are in dramatic decline." A sitting US senator is publicly saying the flagship carrier of American power needs to come home, that its sailors are breaking, that the machine is straining under the weight of a mission that was never properly defined, never properly authorized, and never honestly explained to the American people. That is not a minor political comment. That is a senator sounding an alarm that the Pentagon and the White House are doing everything they can to muffle, because the narrative must hold. The carriers must look invincible. The mission must look justified. The war must look winnable. And a fire in the laundry room coming on top of sewage flooding the berthing areas, coming on top of sailors deliberately blocking pipes, coming on top of a deployment that has lasted 9 months and counting, all of that threatens the narrative. All of that punctures the image. All of that reminds the American people that the gap between the mythology of American military supremacy and the reality of American military overextension is not academic. It is burning, literally in a laundry room in the Red Sea, on the longest carrier deployment since Vietnam, in the middle of a war that peace was close enough to touch before it began. That is where we are, and you deserve to know it.